Thank you, Millie Edwards. Morning, everybody. How are we doing? Good to see you. You're usually up in the balcony, aren't you? Oh, yeah. You guys changed neighborhoods? Yeah, it's good to have you out. How is everybody today? Good? As you can tell, the theme for this morning is kind of on perseverance or overcoming. And I know that every single person in this room, even though I don't know you personally, every single person in this room has had a time in your life when things were so bad, where things seemed so destitute, where you were in such darkness that you couldn't see, you felt so lost that you couldn't be found, and you're just there. And worse than that, if you're like me, you thought that this is the way life is always going to be. It'll never change because of the loss I experienced, because of the devastating setback, because of something that happened that changed our lives and just took us down into this deep, dark valley of hopelessness. So when we sing Amazing Grace, it's grace that is that spirit within us that allows us to rise up and move beyond that, no matter how deep, no matter how dark it is. Every single alcoholic knows that once they get into recovery, they can look back and see how destitute their life was, but there was something that allowed them to recover and move into a life that was happy and joyful. It's the same thing with divorce. It's the same thing with death. Life happens. I often say that we come into this world, we're born, that's the beginning of our time. We leave this world, that's when our life is complete. In between the beginning and the end, there is a line that is a timeline. It is our lifetime. But unfortunately, it's not a nice, smooth line. You know, it's a roller coaster that goes up and down and takes us from the very lows where we barely can stand it to the very highs where we're just exhilarated with life. But there is that spirit within us that allows us to always rise above, move beyond, and overcome anything that intends to or attempts to hamper our peace of mind and sense of well-being. You know, that is consciousness. Consciousness is everything. Consciousness was there at the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. Consciousness has steadily evolved. Everything around you that you see came forth first in consciousness. Consciousness precedes all physical manifestation, whether the chairs, the building, the streets, the cars, or you. It doesn't make any difference. Consciousness always precedes. The image is held in consciousness, and that image grows into the physical manifestation of whatever the idea is. And as we look through the history of consciousness, it's interesting to see that consciousness always takes leaps. When life is threatened in some way, or when there is such chaos and such confusion and such crises, consciousness will leap into another dimension in order to give the life form what it needs to survive under the attack of the chaos and confusion. At one point in time, with the earliest life forms, say the amoeba, consciousness was very low. There was just a slight glimmer that it existed, but there weren't the powers of consciousness that have come forth. There wasn't a sensory power. The amoeba couldn't sense. Then, with cells, the sensory power came forth in consciousness, and cells were able to sense light, which made a big, big difference in the evolution of things. They could sense light. And as their senses developed, all this information started imploding down upon them that they needed some way to process it or some way to handle it. And so the nervous system evolved. And the nervous system would handle all the sensual impressions that were coming in. But then it got to the point where there needed to be a central processing agent. The nervous system couldn't handle it anymore, so then the brain came into being. And as the brain evolved, it developed into many different life forms, and it went from just a sensing consciousness to a thinking consciousness. Life forms could actually think about what they had to do to survive. It continued to evolve until the modern human being developed, and the emotional power of consciousness came into being. We could actually feel emotions in regards to what was happening in our lives. So that still is the way we live our lives today. We go forth, we sense what is happening around us, we define it with our thinking mind, and then we determine how we feel about it. This is what's happening. This is what I think about it. This is how I feel about it. It's a sensory, thinking, feeling approach to life. And that has worked up to this point. But it's very obvious that a lot of our thinking has not completely been on the right track. You know, if we look at the trends of consciousness and the trends of humanity, we can see that it wasn't that long ago that if two tribes had a squabble, they would throw rocks at each other. And then they sharpened the rocks. And then they put the rocks on the end of sticks and spears. And then they had bow and arrows. And then they had bullets. And then they had bombs. And the bombs were originally shot out of a cannon, and then they were dropped from the air, and then there were missiles, and now we have nuclear bombs. And the nuclear bombs are capable of being fired by pushing a button and decimating a 2 or 3 mile area someplace on the other side of the world and killing hundreds of thousands of people in a single bomb. Now, with the rational mind, the thinking mind, we can sit down and we can say, well, we need to do that to defend ourselves, and we need to protect ourselves. There's all sorts of rationalization as to why we need to have, in this country, 7,000 nuclear bombs. But then if we go to the next level of consciousness, which is the intuitive level of consciousness, which is not based on reasoning, it's not based on logic, it doesn't speak in or direct us in verbal forms, but it's that deep underneath feeling of wisdom, and some people call it God mind, they call it Christ mind, they call it Buddha mind, and it overwhelms all of our thinking powers and says, how do I feel about this? I can rationalize, yeah, we need 6,000 nuclear weapons to protect ourselves, but if I move away from my thoughts and I go to that intuitive aspect, how do I really feel about that? That these bombs are designed, built, and set to fire and kill hundreds of thousands of people in the process, innocent people. How do I feel about that? Well, how I feel about it is the true answer as to whether we should be doing it or not. And the answer is no. The only thing is, everybody in the world has to cooperate on that particular basis. You know, we're all very interested in Iran right now, who's building nuclear bombs, but the United States has 6,000. There's 24,000 in the world. Pakistan, India are also building nuclear weapons, and very seldom has there been a weapon built that hasn't been used. So my point is, in that thinking realm of consciousness, we know that we cannot survive if we continue along that trend of not getting along with each other and increasing our weapon capabilities. It's the same thing with our environmental programs and policies. If we look at the trends, we know that we're eventually going to extinguish much of the life on Earth if we don't change. Now, rationally, I can say, yes, but we need to cut down the trees in order to have paper, and yes, but we need to have the big corporations that are polluting our streams, and we run on oil, and therefore the oil spills can be justified. But when I step back out of that and say, well, but how do I feel about that? How do I feel about seeing my world kind of disintegrate? And it doesn't feel good. And I'm sure it doesn't for any of you. And that means that we probably need to change. So when it comes to 2012 in the Mayan calendar, the 5,000-year-old calendar that ends on December 21st, it actually means a time of revealing. And most people, or most researchers, most of the spiritual minds of the day, believe that to mean that a new way of living is going to be revealed to us. And we know that that new way of living will not be revealed in the circle of consciousness that we're presently in. We can't solve the problems in the same circle of consciousness that they were created in. We have to broaden our consciousness. We have to move more into the intuitive, and it's that intuitive that will come forth and allow our thoughts to mature and our ego to mature so that we have a greater sense of global cooperation and a greater sense of unity within, where we feel like we are part of the whole thing. Now, let me give you an example of intuition. Hypothetically, I'm late on my rent. I owe $500. I've been given notice by my landlord I need to be out in 10 days. Don't have the money, don't see it coming in. I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden here's a wallet. And I look around to see if anybody's watching, nobody is. So I get the wallet, keep walking, $500. This is a message from God. Thank you. And immediately my thinking mind kicks in. Well, I needed $500. I got $500. In Unity, they call that manifestation or the law of attraction. I attracted it to me. And I'm coming up with all these justifications as to why that $500 will be mine, that it was meant to be. But then if I step out of that thinking realm into my intuition, it's like, well, how do I feel about this? It's somebody else's money. It's not mine. I don't feel good. Except in my thinking mind, it doesn't make any difference if you feel good or not. You're going to pay your rent. You're going to have a place to live. But it's not your money. And that feeling of guilt and that feeling of shame isn't going to stop with you paying your rent. It is going to continue forward for the rest of your life. And that's what intuition does. It keeps us on the straight and narrow. When we move into something where we're undecided about what to do, we turn to an intuitive part of ourselves and say, how do I feel about this? We'll get a feeling. It's not a word that comes forth, bad, good, or indifferent. It's this feeling, and if it's not a good feeling, that's telling us that you are not going to, or that you will have this not good feeling going forth if you make this decision until you rectify it. We all know that. We've all done things in the past that didn't feel good. We did it anyway because our thinking mind rationalized it, and still 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, there's that little guilt in there, even though we try to shove it in the closet, that little guilt or shame or something in there that says, yeah, I really shouldn't have done that. It wasn't the right move. So we have this intuitive mind, and everybody has it. It doesn't rely on reasoning. It doesn't rely on logic. It doesn't rely on our past history of learning. It is the wisdom of the ages. It's in our DNA. We are hot-wired with this special intuitive function. And it is there. If that's the case, if there are 4 functions of consciousness, sensing, thinking, feeling, and intuitive, if each and every one of us has this intuitive mind that we can turn to that will guide us down the straight and narrow, make better decisions for us, then why don't we utilize it? And the answer is very simple. It's because we are afraid. In our thinking mind, we know whether the thoughts are true or false. We know what's there. We know how we are. We know how to act and react. We know what to think because we've conditioned ourselves to be in that box. But then all of a sudden, here's the intuition that's coming in with a whole different way of feeling about things, and it's the intuition that is setting the thinking in place, not the thinking that is setting the feeling in place, and the intuition oftentimes disagrees with the way we think because it is based on wisdom, and our thinking is based on everything that everybody has ever told us. We are afraid we don't trust the intuition. And this is common throughout nature. Whenever there's been a great evolutionary step, whatever it was that is evolving could never see what it was evolving into. And it was a time of fear and trepidation of some sort. A perfect example of this is the caterpillar metamorphosizing into the butterfly. The lowly caterpillar is pedaling along the road, eating as much as it possibly can until it fattens up to the point that it can hardly move. It either has to die or it has to make some sort of a change. So the caterpillar begins to regurgitate this substance, coat itself with it, and it turns into a cocoon. It buries itself in the cocoon. Now in the cocoon, the entire caterpillar disintegrates down into nothing more than soupy substance. There is no form. There is no caterpillar. There's no leg. There is no eye. There's no antennae. It's just this soupy, oozy substance. In this soupy, oozy substance, you still have the caterpillar cells, but then somehow, from somewhere, new cells start to arise. They're called imaginal cells. And the imaginal cells hold the image of the butterfly. So the imaginal cells start to rise up, but the old butterfly cells see it as something strange, something different. The imaginal cells are seen as invaders, so they kill them. The old caterpillar cells kill the new imaginal butterfly cells because they're different, and they don't understand. They think that their entire universe is being invaded by these new types of cells. But the imaginal cells continue. to proliferate and grow in bigger numbers. And then they cluster together. And then clusters join with clusters. And pretty soon they have the power where they turn to, they turn to the old caterpillar cells and they start assigning them duties. It's like you used to be a caterpillar cell, now you're a butterfly cell and you're going to be a wing. And that message is sent to that cell, and it starts to become part of the wing process. But the whole point I'm trying to make is in that big change, the caterpillar didn't know or couldn't understand that it was going from being this lowly creature to the lovely butterfly. It was afraid of it because it was something brand new. And that is the same with each and every one of us. If you have an image of the new person that you want to be, if you want to lose your fears and lose your worries and lose your anxieties, that is entirely possible. But you have to take your direction from a source outside of that which has made you be what you are. And that is basically the thinking mind. We have to turn to the intuition and say, okay, this is my vision of what I see in the future. And your intuition will tell you, whether it's a good feeling or a bad feeling, it will tell you if you are on the right path to becoming what you want to be. We have to trust it. It is our next step in evolution. It is the one thing that is going to save you from any past suffering, misery, or worries or anxieties that you've been carrying with you. It is something the entire world needs to move into, to think of a different way for the future that is not based in fear and greed, which is primarily the way every one of our government exists, is fear and greed. You know, I'm afraid they might attack me, so I'm going to build my weapons. I want what they have, so I'm going to go get it. We have to move beyond that paradigm of that thinking into the intuitive. We are all one. What is good for all of us? Now, for you individually, the biggest point is getting to a point where you realize that you are not your thoughts. If you have a thought about yourself, that's not you. That is just a thought in your consciousness. You are not your desires or your beliefs. That is just part of consciousness. But like the caterpillar, you have the ability to evolve beyond that. I was talking to my good friend Ada Winnick a while back, and we were talking about one thing or another, and I shared with her a thought that I had about myself that wasn't particularly complimentary. And it's a thought that I'd had for some time. And she said, well, who would you be if you didn't have that thought? And I wondered, who would I be if I didn't have that thought? And the first word that came to mind is, I'd be delightful. It would be great. And so the conclusion was, that thought is not you. That is just something that has risen in your consciousness that you can move beyond. We're going to take this up again next week and talk more about the intuitive mind and exactly where it's placed at in the body. But for now, I want you to think of a thought that might not be complimentary about yourself, a thought that might be disparaging, or a thought that might have negative connotations, and just think, who would I be if I didn't have that thought? We'll now move into meditation. If you were to ask yourself, how do I feel about who I am? The thinking mind would give you all sorts of criteria to judge you. It might say you did this or you did that, which wasn't right. It might say you're too tall, you're too small, you weigh too much. It might bring up all the losses and failures you've had. But if in this moment you take your right hand and you put it over your heart, and you say, how do I feel about how I am? The intuitive mind will come forth with a good feeling. Because there is nothing wrong with you. You're a human being on the planet Earth. You're part of a 14 billion year story of evolution. There is meaning and purpose to your life, and you have abundance to share. You're good. You're a good person. So for a moment in the silence, allow yourself to feel good about who you are. Allow yourself to feel good about where you're at right now, sitting in that seat. Allow yourself to feel good about the day you have ahead of you. And just know, whether it seems like it or not, everything is okay. In the silence. We now come back to this time and this place. We do so with confidence, enthusiasm, and excitement that we have to live the life that is ours to live. Amen.
Something beautiful, something good. All my confusion he understood, when all I had to offer was brokenness and strife. God made something beautiful of my life. God made something beautiful of my life.
Please take advantage of them. And we will have the prayer for protection. Who's going to say that? Audrey and Sydney? Here.